Greetings, everyone, and welcome to what I think will be a short video on a quite fascinating case. Could someone in the chat room please let me know if you can hear me and see the screen that should have beginning of a statement on it? I want to make sure my audio is working properly here. Okay, so we're going to look at the case of Nathan Carmen, which I think is a fascinating case, one that has some unique attributes that may be a bit challenging at times here. This case goes back to 2016. In the fall of 2016, Nathan Carmen and his mother went out fishing on a large fishing boat in the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Rhode Island. This was September 18, 2016. In this, he reported engine malfunction, water coming in, and he was able to get into a lifeboat while his large fishing boat sank with his mother on it. And so I think this is going to be interesting as we take a look at this, and be good to have any questions that you'd like to pose towards it. So regarding the first important thing is that I mentioned that experts had said that the analysis can't be done because of Asperger's. And I understand the objections. And then there was also, I think, at the time, a number of personal emails I received, particularly of mothers of those with Asperger's who were pretty sensitive about the analysis and some of the characterization that I use and that others use. And I understand that type of upsetment. I don't have a lot of experience interviewing adults with Asperger's. It would be about 2 years tops, and that includes autism, adults with adult autism, and some with Asperger's. And so it's not something that I always feel sure of doing. There are times where, especially with adult autism, where interviews were conducted, what I would call block interviews, where someone had much difficulty communicating. And there was also always the danger of perseveration, where someone might be making an accusation, but is literally reliving something from 20 years ago. And so that can become very complicated. With the Asperger's in particular, there is an entire constellation of distinctives to deal with. And what I had here, and what I'd like to start with playing for you, is simply the audio from the initial rescue call with the Coast Guard. And then I'm able to at least refer back, not going to go into it here, but refer back to some of the public interviews that Nathan gave. The concern is that his grandfather was very wealthy, millions of dollars, and he had died and left it to his daughters, I believe, one of which was Nathan's mother. And could he have been responsible for the boat sinking in order to obtain millions of dollars from his mother? And that was the open question for me to look at. But I want to talk about, we'll get to the language a little bit there. First, let me give you, if you can hear this, just try this. This is the short call with the Coast Guard rescue call.
Hello, this is Nathan Carmen.
Nathan, this is United States Coast Guard, Boston.
Hello?
Nathan, this is United States
Yes, I hear you.
Yes, sir. I need to understand what happened. Over.
Mom and I, two people, myself and my mom, were fishing at Block Canyon, and there was a funny noise in the engine compartment. I looked and saw a lot of water. I had my mom bring in the wheel. I brought the safety stuff forward, and I was bringing one of the safety bags forward. The boat dropped out from under my feet. When I saw the life raft, I did not see my mom. Have you found her?
No, we haven't been able to find her yet.
So I got to the life raft after I got my bearings, and I was whistling and calling and looking around, and I didn't see her.
Understood. Okay.
So we're fishing around Block Canyon.
Right. And when did that happen? Do you remember what day?
I don't know the exact coordination. When did that happen? Do you remember that day? Yes, it was a week ago today around midday.
Okay, so last Sunday.
Yes.
Okay. Hopefully that came through for you well enough, and closing some of these screens may help a little bit with the internet connection. I don't have a good connection here where I am. We're in rural Maine, and it doesn't always work so well. Okay, with the and Tanya, I'm glad you're here. She's echoing some very similar statements I'm going to make regarding this. When I did this analysis originally, as some of you already know, I found him to be deceptive about what happened to his mother. I then had other analysts look at that, and they came, and I'm not sure if we worked as a team together or individually, but several analysts worked on it, and they all came to the same conclusion, that he is not being truthful about what happened to his mother. Now, with the Asperger's and what I've found here, and then later on in subsequent interviews, is that there may be at times an emotional blunting of the language. I often have found, and often being relative, and these are not always from interviews, but at times a strong intelligence. But there seems to be, for some, an emotional disconnect in language. Not necessarily emotional disconnect, but an emotional disconnect in language. And so I'm going to look at that. I'm going to look at how short this call was, this rescue call. The context of that he has now been in a lifeboat for a week. So he would have time to process a lot of the information, the trauma that would take place like that. So we want to look at all those things when we analyze and basically push back against the analysis. So as we confront the analysis and say, no, this can't be because of this or because of that, and we try to eliminate everything by excusing it due to context, from Asperger's to the time delay, to the trauma, to, from my perspective, the possibility that he is suffering from malnutrition during this week's period of time, having lost his mother, being someone that would be very close to him. He lives with her. All these things can be factored into the language. Will the analysis still hold up after those things are factored in? So this is something that's going to be very important to consider as we go through this. So if you can see the screen, I hope it's large enough that you can see the screen. And when he gets through to the Coast Guard a week later, he begins with hello. Generally speaking, as we're looking at this as an emergency call, that's not something we expect to hear. We don't expect to hear someone give a greeting. And what I'm used to looking at with that is the 911, 999 emergency calls. When something serious is being reported and a missing person, a person who is bleeding, someone who's in an emergency, we don't expect the type of pause to greet the other side. What I'd like to do is discount that here because of the radio signal. Now, the radio signal sounded fine to me, but just given that context and wanting to object to each part of the analysis to see how it holds up, I think it's a good practice. So, hello, this is Nathan Carmen. Nathan, this is the United States Coast Guard, Boston. Then Nathan says, hello. He pauses with the echo and says, yes, I can hear you. So it's repeated and a bit concerning because we normally flag these things. But again, if you'd like to discount that, there's going to be something that we can use later on. We don't want to be those that see deception everywhere. We want to be those that can verify truth or to see and discern truth within statements. Most deceptive statements have lots of truth to them. And when we become overly suspicious and dismissive and every voice inflection or every body movement, we rush to make a conclusion about deception, we're going to miss a lot of information. I mentioned years ago an investigator on television, and it may have been for effect, said something to this effect about Casey Anthony. I know she's lying when her lips are moving, and dismissing a deceptive person's language can be a terrible mistake in an investigation, because most people are deceptive by what they withhold. That's how most people, 90% perhaps. And so the other things that are still in there are often very valuable and truthful, reliable information. So we want to hear that. So I've begun with a concern here that, hey, this is a pretty bad emergency, but I'd like to discount that because it's been a week, and I'm listening, see if he's able to communicate well. Now, with Asperger's, like anything else, is there an expectation from the speaker that he will be understood? I'm talking about adults now, not children. And Asperger's and or autism. Is there an expectation that communication will be understood? And is there a history where communication is understood? And so with this, it becomes quite obvious that he can be understood. There's not a need for someone else to interpret and explain for him. And this is going to be a big piece, just in understanding the analysis. Later on, he did give interviews in media, which were able to gain a baseline of his language, his ability to grasp, his ability to change the topic, his ability to impact the time, the element of time within a statement. So even if I give this one a pass, I'm still going to be curious about this. And why is hello, hi, why is it so concerning in an emergency call? We look at it as a possibility of psychological ingratiation. In other words, let's presume, and this is not how we do it in the analysis, but let's presume for this type of case or this context that a domestic homicide has taken place. The person making the emergency call committed the crime. In the phone call, he does not want to be perceived as the bad guy. He doesn't want to get caught. And so what some will do is they will literally ingratiate themselves. They will make friends. They will wish to be on the side of law enforcement. They're not talking to an operator. They're talking to a recording. They're talking to law enforcement. They're talking to authority. They're talking to those who have the ability to arrest them. And so we do find, particularly in homicide investigations, that a guilty caller will try to ingratiate himself. Now, some will avoid this and will give as little information as possible, which itself is a red flag. If someone has been killed and you find them, you want to find out who did this. You want to help law enforcement as the best you can. It's one of the interesting things I found on the cases of Madeleine McCann and John Benet Ramsey from many years ago is the parents' unwillingness to facilitate the flow of information by working with law enforcement. They're literally attempting to snuff out the ability to solve the case. Here we have the ingratiation on the second one, and yes, he hears you. Now, picture this. It's inescapable, but each one of us will begin in a case, and each one of us, meaning analysts, where they can't help but to project. They can't help but put themselves in, say to themselves, what would I have said if I had lost my mother to sea and didn't know what happened? Didn't know where she was. It's fair to say we go right to it. That is our priority statement. Yes, we want to, especially in an emergency, give the address when it's asked and answer that question. But when they say, what happened in any form, we look there for the priority to get right to the issue. Now, if his mother was able to have a life jacket on, which she may have in normal circumstances, and maybe floated over to a rock, maybe she is safe, he doesn't know. So that's my expectation. Now, not a lot of cases like this to work from, but let's say in a missing child case. People love to say, you don't know what you would say. So it's not fair for you to do this in analysis. Again, it's inescapable. We try not to, but we can't help it. We're human. You don't know what someone would say in a circumstance like that. Yes, we do. The data is overwhelming. We have lots and lots of these things. Regrettably, lots and lots of emergency calls to work from. We're able to see patterns. So when a child goes missing and a person's priority is not that child, we're going to take note of it. So let's take a look at the language here of what he uses. So I am flagging this, and I am concerned the second one, even though I want to dismiss the first one. I'm going to look at the second one. And the Coast Guard says, yes, sir, I need to understand what happened over, and over meaning your turn to speak. And so this is probably the most important part of this short statement, where he's now going to address this. What happened? My boat sank. I can't find my mom. That's what I'm looking for. So he says, Mom and I, two people, myself and my mom, were fishing at Block Canyon. So he goes back in time. He's not in the present. Mom and I are separated here. It's not our boat sank, my mom's missing. Mom and I, two people. This is to separate himself from her. Now, one of the things I did with the analysis when I saw this, Mom and I separated them, two people, myself and my mom, and there he takes ownership now of her. What would cause him to initially, in speaking to the Coast Guard, to speaking to authorities, what would cause him to separate, that's number one, Mom and I, to separate himself from his mom initially, and then to further declare that Mom and I are two people. So this is unnecessary language. This is an emergency call where we don't expect a greeting and this type of detail now. We expect them to go right to it. My boat sank. I can't find my mom. I'm in a lifeboat now. So why emphasize two people? Myself and my mom. So we have Mom and I, which we know are two people. This being utterly unnecessary to say, especially in the context of an emergency. But he emphasizes it. And then he expands upon it again. So one of the things we do in training people for the ability to identify an anonymous author is we look for unnecessary emphasis. So if I've written a hate statement and I say, we, all of us, all together, are going to do such and such, the unnecessary emphasis tells the analyst that author is alone. Here, we have to consider something outside of this meaning. And what I concluded at the time was, I believe as he's now reporting this as an emergency, not only is he going back in time to the beginning of the trip, instead of going right to what the issue is now, but he wants to make sure that they understand there's only two people involved. My belief at the time was that he's thinking about at least a third person. And later on, I think we've seen in media reports that there may indeed have been someone he was thinking about at this time, someone who witnessed him tampering with the engine before they set sail, before they left the harbor. And so at the time when I first did the analysis, that was my recommendation for investigators, is to find out if there's anyone else he's thinking about. You clear, of course, that those two were the only ones, but from the start of this, he went back to the start. From the start of this, was there someone else that would have been on his mind? And that may, later on we learned, but that may have been the case where he was thinking about one of the dock workers that saw him. So Mom and I, two people, myself and my mom, we got that. We're fishing at Block Canyon. And there was a funny noise in the engine compartment. Now, at this point, those with law enforcement backgrounds said, he's lying, he's storytelling, because he didn't go right to the present need. He didn't go to where the emergency is. He's not only gone back to the beginning of their fishing trip, which, by the way, he wants to make sure in the beginning here, it was just the two of them. Consider. And not only is he starting back chronologically earlier, but he now slows down the pace in an emergency call while his mother is missing. He now slows down the pace. This is often an indication, especially under this context, that there is something that is of high stress and sensitivity that he wishes to avoid. It's slowing down. It's a psychological form of avoidance that we all do, but we find it without a great deal of difficulty in criminal statements. So let's say that I was doing a seminar, and I use this as an example. And in the afternoon, I come back to the investigators and say, I'd like every one of you to write out what you did from the time you got here up to right now. Because somewhere during the break this morning, my wallet went missing. One of you took it. And of course, investigators, those that did not take the wallet, are going to say, I didn't take your wallet. But let's say everyone writes out a statement, and I want details of everything they did during that day. What we're going to likely find in the guilty party is a lot of information before the wallet was stolen, because they don't want to get there. And then when they do get there, the pace picks up quickly. What I mean by pace is, this is not cadence. It's in terms of being able to hear someone speak. This is detail, extra detail before I get to what happened. And so this is exactly what he's doing, is he's giving it unnecessary detail. At this point, later on in the investigation, you're going to say everything you remember about it. So when cops say this is storytelling, and we call it a narrative building, it also will give the appearance of someone that has rehearsed, likely for the last 7 days, what he's going to say. And he said, and, which is a connection to the previous sentence, and there was a funny noise in the engine compartment. And if you've seen my notes, I was concerned that the funny noise was something horrible. But this is an unnecessary detail that goes back and still doesn't get to what the emergency is. He should be in need of rescue himself, and would he not want to know where his mom is? Did they find his mom? And there was a funny noise in the engine compartment. And here we have another unnecessary word and slowing down of the pace of the statement. He's not getting to the particular. He's giving us an extra detail. It's a funny noise in the engine compartment. It was taking on water. No, he said, I looked and I saw. And this, again, is where people, professionals in law enforcement, generally have a good intuition about someone that's making a story up, that's building a story. Now, so let's say, if you want to object, say, hey, you're saying this guy's lying and making these things up. What good is his words? My concern is, if something went wrong with an engine, you don't need to look for it and then describe your scene. You're going to hear a noise, you're going to run to it. But for him, it was funny. And then the water comes in. To whom is it funny? To our subject, who separated himself with his own mother once, twice, 3 times. For those of you that are not familiar with this criminal report, so this was in 2016 where the event happened. What I didn't tell you was about his grandfather's death, his mom's father, who left the millions to his family. He died from a gunshot wound, which has technically never been solved. Nathan Carmen has been a suspect or suspected of killing his grandfather years before. This would now bring to fruition the ability to get the inheritance for himself. I wonder if the funny noise, that it was funny to him, was a gurgling sound of his mother or his mother's scream for help. if memory serves, I could qualify with that one. If memory serves me well, his denial about killing his grandfather was unreliable in media. This is not private information, in media. I believe he did. Then he said, as he slows down this pace, I brought the line, he didn't say that, was bringing. This is to further emphasize the stretching or elongating of time. I was bringing, not I brought, I was bringing the line. Had my mom, which what we do here is we'll note that in here, there should be a pronoun, and I had my mom. I had my mom. He's telling us he's in charge. And had my mom bring in the real. He psychologically ejects himself from this. Now, what we say in analysis is that if he can't say it, we can't believe it. If he doesn't say it, I can't say it for him. So who had my mom bring? And for someone that uses, and I listened again as I played that before, the pronoun I regularly, if he drops it all of a sudden, we better take notice of that right here. It's missing. This reminds me of a teenager who got caught. But it's much more sinister here. He didn't commit to a strong past tense, I brought, but then it goes even further of a lack of commitment by ejecting himself psychologically from the rest of that sentence, from that portion of the sentence. He dropped a pronoun from a person, a subject, who doesn't drop pronouns. So this is very concerning, what the state of his mom was at this point. Had my mom, we don't know who had his mom, but had my mom bring in the real, I brought up to safety stuff forward, and I was bringing one of the safety bags forward, the boats, or just dropped out from my feet. So a little bit tricky, I think, with the audio there. When I saw the life raft, lifeboat life raft, he reports what he did not see. I did not see my mom. So there's a jump in time there. There's an absence of his presence. A stretch of time in these things, again here. So he's elongating time while he dismisses himself, where in context, from my mom. And then he tells us in the negative, I did not see my mom. So I wondered about, again, if he would consider what he heard to be funny. It's his word, not mine. Something that caused him to look and see. Word saw there. Look and see. More slowing down of the pace, more time being stretched out. I want to know why this is the last thing he reports in terms of his priority. Why was it to be starting back here? Now, if this was a conversation held later on and an investigator is bringing him through every small detail, that would be expected, not an emergency call though. So finally, pause, need to think about this. Pause, need to think about that. So I think here he was probably very well prepared. Have you found her? No, and I don't mind this guy's pausing because he's got to be nervous telling his son, your mom's lost. It's been a week. So he doesn't comment on that, but he does continue his, what I call a story. So I got to the life raft after I got my bearings. Now, one's bearings, I don't think he's talking about the positioning of the boat where it was. I think this is a placement of emotion where someone has lost their bearings due to whatever took place. And I was whistling, and obviously that what took place is he heard a funny noise. He looked and he saw water coming in. And then we had this disappearance. And I was whistling and calling and looking around, and I didn't see her. So look how many words he needs to describe not seeing her. Look at the verb tenses he uses. Not that he whistled, but was whistling, stretching it out, calling, not called for her, stretching it out, and looking around, which of course is unnecessary, and then telling us in the negative, elevating its importance, what he didn't see. Understood, okay. We were fishing around Block Canyon. So it's really important that they perceive this as a fishing trip. And what I flagged here was, let's see if any of you can understand why this has to be explored for, and this going back to 2016, this is premeditation. So I want you to know that I had this planned. I want you to think that we were fishing. By the way, did I tell you before we were fishing? So he's doubling down upon that. So this is explored for premeditation, and I think obviously now, for those of you that may have missed this, he's been arrested in her murder. And I think that the number of years that passed and with no activity makes the analysis look like it's wrong. And then obviously there comes later on where it seemed to be correct, at least as far as the prosecutors believe. We were fishing around Block Canyon. So there's no need to tell me this. I get the location part, but there's no need to go back to fishing. And when did that happen? This is a great question. I don't believe I have the exact coordinates, which goes back to location, activity, location. This was important. This isn't. This came first. I don't have the exact coordinates. You can hear the echo in the audio. He said, yes, it was a week ago today around midday. So there's a week that goes on of which timing is lost. And so there's going to be a question on whether or not, let me get back to the regular screen here, whether or not Nathan could have made this report a lot earlier. So my conclusion was deception indicated he is withholding information about what happened to his mother. And I wrote that if he is interviewed using his own words, he's not going to pass, or not likely to pass, a polygraph. Now, I have a lot of confidence in the polygraph, but only when it's used appropriately, meaning that a subject's own language is going to be used, not the language of the investigator. And so I guess it's now been about 6.5 years or so, and he's under arrest, and they may, he likes to talk, and they may present a good case. I'll keep an eye on that. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to tell you. When I got to the media interviews affirmed the analysis. In other words, he spoke freely, he spoke a lot, he sought to control the interviews, he's very intelligent. But we saw some of the same patterns that said, yeah, he was lying. He knows what he's doing. This is not something that can be blamed on Asperger's. Yeah, he definitely liked to talk. He liked the attention. Let's take a look. Angela, Angela's asking, how do you know that funny was as humorous and not odd? I don't know. That was an opinion I had to draw in given the context. Also, and I don't have a great deal of knowledge in this area, but if something goes wrong with an engine where water comes rushing in, it's going to be a little more than odd, the sound. And I believe that that's what was witnessed, him tampering with his own engine. And one media source reported that there was an exchange between the witness who worked there and Nathan, where the witness was rather challenging. Why are you doing that? It's a shame he wasn't thinking, I better report this. This guy is sabotaging his own boat. So, but that is a good question to ask. Okay, going back to the third person, his need to emphasize there was only two of us, pushing it in this way, there's only two of us, would just cause me to say, let me look if there's someone else on his mind. He had the need to repeat it. He could have said, my mom is missing, and gone right to the priority, and then they would naturally say, anyone else on the boat with you all? And I do have a difficult time giving a definition of Asperger's. There are so many different degrees of impact. There are similarities where it works, but it can be really difficult. Am I going to do Shannon Gilbert's 911 call? Faye, send it to me in my email address. I'm not familiar with it. Mostly I've been getting bombarded with, why aren't you doing Amber Heard and whatever his name is? And there's a good reason for that. I do support analysis of celebrities. You can learn a lot about dissociation, privilege, and how actors can deceive. The reason I haven't done that, besides being limited in time, is because during testimony, at any given point, there's very likely to be truth and deception mixed together. And oftentimes the public really dislikes that. They just want to know which one's telling the truth. And my conclusion would be, they're both lying, they're both telling the truth, it's mixed together. And so it's difficult to pull out each place, terribly time consuming. So I had never heard of her. I've heard of him from, I think the 90s or something. I had never heard of her before that. And I caught, of course, on Twitter, some of the short testimony that she was given, and I see what people see. It's interesting. Take a look at that. So do send me Shannon Gilbert's 911 call. Ryan, good point about the psychological cleansing. The reason I didn't go there was because of the nature. He's in water at that point. And it seemed to me very well rehearsed that he's going to say water was coming in. Usually it's taking on water, but he downplayed it. How reliable is intuition detecting deception? When I listened to the clip, it sounded deceptive in my go. I find that it's not. And it's a good question, Aaron. Oftentimes our experiences, especially if we've been burned in life or hurt, we have a tendency to perceive things as deceptive. And culturally, we're moved into an area where deception has become a norm, so that makes it even more difficult. What I do in the training with that, Aaron, is I get, especially like in law enforcement, they can become really jaded with that tough job. And this is before the political pylon that they've experienced, because they deal with people that are routinely lying. And so we try to put that aside. And one of the ways we do that is to get the person to articulate, what is it about this that you think is deceptive? Now, I know that people love to do some superficials with tears and this and that, but a guilty person can be crying because he got caught. He could genuinely have regret for being caught or being suspected, or he did something that he wished he hadn't done. And so someone will say crocodile tears, and it goes back and forth and that sort of thing. Also, there's the influence of psychotropic drugs that people put in them and the doctors put in them, so that can have a great impact. The Titanic had an iceberg. I don't know if I've ever heard it described as funny, but there was music, for some of them, there was music playing and a large scraping noise. What I was concerned more about is the funny noise that came, Max, while the pace was being slowed down of the statement. We didn't need to hear any description. We need to go right to where your mom is. And he would have had a week to prepare his speech, I think that. And you know what? Someone wrote, fair play to you, Peter. I think I'd end up second guessing everything. That's really good to do. That's really healthy. I'm going to do another, hopefully a video with a couple other experts on Christian Bruckner, man that German prosecutors said killed Madeleine McCann, on some of his wording. And one of the things I asked them to do was debate, have an open debate. Let's mix it up there. The audience can make the decision, but where there's just a kind of a lockstep agreement on everything, really not terribly valuable. So there was a case in the news this week, a case that I had worked on years ago, where a teenager went missing on spring break. And I only had a short statement from her boyfriend. And so what I left it as was, is this guilty knowledge or an obnoxious teenager? Because someone 13 years later has confessed to it, and her remains have been found, so her mother will begin to get more closure. I had come to that conclusion that he's either deceptive or he's an obnoxious teenager. He really was an obnoxious teenager in the sense that he didn't help. He lawyered up, he was difficult, wouldn't answer questions for the family. And this is a part of analysis that's really tricky. Let's say that I didn't kill the guy we find on the sidewalk, but I robbed the body. My language is going to show deception when asked about killing of the victim. We call that attendant guilt, and that can show up on a lot of things. With Christian Bruckner, he's done some bad things. He's been convicted of really bad things. So I have an expectation of guilt coming out in his language. So hopefully we'll be able to carry that, and you'll see some of the complexities of that. Sherry, what if he hated his mom? Let me throw that up. I think that's really good. Hated his mom and not troubled by accident, therefore not caring if she's alive and happy she's hasn't been found. I.e., if I turn your question around and just make it in the imperative, I agree. I think he did hate his mom. I think that he, and I just want to guard my words because of other factors involved in the case, but I think he put her under a lot of pressure to go on that fall fishing trip that she didn't want to go on. I also think he killed his grandfather. So you can probably guess how cold he is in that sense. So what you put as a question, which is proper to do, is really a good insight. Yeah, parents know about those teens that drop pronouns all of a sudden. Email is hyattanalysis@gmail.com, and thank you for that. I don't think mom's body was ever found. It's not a case I kept up with after. I know that the family, like mom's sisters, for instance, they wanted to bring civil suit as they were frustrated without the justice for. Tina, I don't believe there a cadaver dog hid on Bruckner's closet. And if you follow me on Twitter, which I sometimes post there, the German prosecutor, one of them, Hans Christian something or other, he doesn't believe his own words. He doesn't have confidence in his own words in the prosecution. It's a publicity stunt. So they have an easy target with someone as bad as Bruckner. Is inflection part of analysis? Yeah, we go through a transcript generally without the recording. We will eventually listen to the recording, and it's impossible to discount inflection, so we do listen. The reason we do it with the words first is because out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. This is the most reliable form of detecting deception, is the language chosen. But that's not to take away from any other schools, body language, listening to the cadence of someone speaking truthfully, that sort of thing. But in terms of investigations, at least, we're able to not only tell if someone's being deceptive, but we're able to look at the truth parts, and that guides investigations. Attendant guilt is a tricky topic. It's very difficult. Only thing I've found further than that, and then what I do is I try to rein in other analysts. Hey, don't jump at this one. This could be, he's guilty. He's shown guilty. He's not truthful. I think we're going to have something for you on the Delhi murders with that. It's so important to have some rigorous debate about that, because someone who may have some knowledge from, let's say, media on the Delhi murders, but has done similar things. Making of a Murderer, which is that documentary, is propaganda. It's not well done at all. But the first time that the accused was convicted of a crime, there was a reason why he was arrested. There was a reason why they believed he had done another crime before that. They knew his patterns. So really fascinating, something that the documentary didn't cover. Tanya's adding in, he's telling us because he has Asperger's, his IQ and verbal is a pattern of his profile, statistically significant difference between IQ and emotional, social intelligence, empathy. Yep, and that's one of the things I think that I addressed in 2016 that was very upsetting for some people to hear, especially some mothers whose sons had Asperger's, the lack of empathy. And so that was a pretty difficult time, and I understand it. Yeah, so hopefully we'll have the Delphi murders. We've been working on it. We'll see what those who are able to share information, what they wish to share, what they don't wish to share. So it's iffy, but public statements we can do. How do personality disorders affect analysis? We look for actually the emergence of those dominant personality traits. Bipolar can show up in the language. Borderline is probably the easiest to pick up, and of course, maybe narcissism is right up there too. But we don't diagnose through language, but we can't help it but not mention it at least. It's not something I ever testify in court over. I'm not qualified to testify in court. But it can be picked up in language. Another thing like that is an active addiction. Comes out in the language fairly easily. So, great question. Faye, I didn't not know that about the making a murderer. Interesting. Lindy Chamberlain, I'm not familiar with that. So if you'd like to you have a transcript, you can send it to the hyattanalysis@gmail.com and take a look. Multiple personalities. Okay, so that's really interesting, brought up in context with the Amber Heard and I can't remember that fellow's name, the male actor. Someone put it out so I can get it right here. Johnny Depp or someone, I don't know. The ability to dissociate is extreme in actors and actresses. They're very talented. They're able to dissociate, which I think at times leads to a lot of immorality because they don't feel the same sense of guilt. And if they do, they can move away from it. Johnny Depp, okay. But also, I found that regularly in the language of women who were childhood victims of sexual abuse. Childhood victims of sexual abuse. There is a certain amount of dissociation in the language. Of course, it can be someone who has just had a sexual assault and immediately tries to dissociate from it. I often find in those cases that woman likely froze during it. That was her survival technique, to freeze, and it's a terribly unhealthy. It's obviously going to impact her health. A rape is going to impact her health anyway. But it seems to me in many of these types of traumas that those that fought rather than freeze may have less PTSD later on, or may be able to be better mitigated. They're always going to suffer, but it may be a better mitigation. So sometimes with sex crimes units, they can think that a victim is lying because of the passivity in the language, but really it's part of dissociation as a survival technique. Actors and actresses, and this is why I say a lot of them come from traumatic backgrounds, so much so that when someone in that world appears to be normal, everyone notices. This guy seems like a regular guy. It's common. It's like a crucible where talent can come forth. The ability to dissociate at will so that they become a character can be used, of course, in court, and we look for it in language. So that was a great question, a great timely question. Yeah, but it's also been found with the the freezing effect. That's why military training is so important. Constant rehearsal, getting the brain to react instantly instead of freezing over a certain sound, something. All right, so I hope that this was helpful for those of you that are thinking about learning, and especially just if you like to practice discernment in terms of news articles that are going by, and it's in every field right now. Culturally, it's become very accepted. So we have quite a bit of deception. Hopefully I'll be able to get some information on some of the other cases that I mentioned, and we'll see you again in another video. So thank you for joining me, everyone, and take care.